still have a lot of people joining, but my name is Tommy O'Halloran. I am the Vice President of Business Development for Structure in New York, and I am also the Vice President of the New York City chapter of CoreNet. So I'd like to welcome you to the second of what will be an ongoing plugged in series, as we're calling it, every Wednesday. And first and foremost, I just hope that everybody on the call here is healthy and safe and remaining that way. This is certainly an unprecedented time right now, not only in our industry, but in the world. So it's just, there's just so much to digest, but the CoreNet, leadership, saw this as an opportunity, which probably isn't the best word, but just a chance to really work towards keeping our chapter members connected and informed, because there's certainly a lot of events that are evolving at a rapid pace in so many aspects of our business that we decided to do these sort of quick get-togethers and meetings. There are 4 per week that we're looking to do, 3 of which are more informal and open mic style coffee chats that we're doing on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And this one, which is the Wednesday, once a week, Wednesday plugged in series, is meant to be more of a formal structure with some subject matter experts on a particular topic. So last week we did leasing and the ramifications that are taking place and being understood around that. This week, obviously, we're going to be speaking about the construction shutdown. Next week, we'll be doing something on presenting virtually. And the following week, we're already lining up something to go back into risk mitigation as it pertains to the legal elements of contracts and leases. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of stuff to talk about. But in this instance, I'll just give a background of how we structured the call, and then I'll hand it off to my co-presenter, Mindy Williams-McElearney, who will go over the introductions and some housekeeping. So with regards to this discussion today, as most here know, it's been an unprecedented 2 weeks, really leading up to the shutdown that took place on Friday via the amendment to the governor's executive order that had gone out the week prior. So what we're going to do is we have a the lenses of a general contractor, an owner's rep, an architect, and a client to go through what they've been experiencing on their end, from lessons learned to best practices to challenges, and to what we've seen, how the shutdown is going, that's still underway, and what we see in store for the duration of the shutdown, however long that lasts, and then the best practices and things to consider as we work towards, hopefully sooner than later, coming out of the shutdown and getting back to business. So with that, I'll pass it off to Mindy, who will go over the housekeeping and then introduce our panelists.
Hi, thanks, Tommy. So as Tommy just mentioned, we've assembled a panel of subject matter experts that represent different perspectives on the current situation. The viewpoints are coming from the occupier, the owner's representative, the architect, and a construction manager. So today's panelists are Jaime Fuertes, who is the Managing Director and Global Head of Corporate Services at Apollo Global Management. Marc Chiapperino, Managing Director and Partner at VVA Project and Cost Managers. Buzz Riley, Managing Director and Principal at IA Interior Architects. And Scott.Corneby, Executive Vice President of Structure Tone. Just before we jump into the panel discussion, I want to make sure that everyone please just take a moment to make sure that you're muted. Never know when we're gonna have a barking dog or a crying child, so if you're not speaking, please just make sure you mute yourself. After the panel discussion, we'll open it up for questions and answers. If you have a question, please use the chat feature, which if you scroll your mouse along the bottom of your screen now, you'll see a little chat bubble on the bottom. So as you have questions, just type them into the chat box, and we'll endeavor to get to as many of them as possible. If there are any questions that we can't answer during the Q&A period, we will send out a follow-up document sharing all of the responses from our panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Scott.Corneby of Structure Tone, who will fill us in on the conversations that took place between the unions and the governor's office leading up to the eventual amendment of the executive order that Governor Cuomo issued on Friday, which declared that all commercial interior construction is non-essential and to be shut down. Scott?
Oh, thank you, Mindy, Tom, and good morning all. And as Tom had mentioned, I hope everyone is doing as well as they can in this current environment. I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes and try to frame kind of where we were in New York and how we got to where we are today. So back the tail end of the week of March 9th or early the week of March 16th, initially, the government had deemed our industry entirely as essential. That meant all the kind of work that we all do, which is different. And I think that also included upstate New York, as you can envision, heavy and highway and bridge work and airports and hospital work and new buildings, as well as, downstate, same criteria, including the interior world. Early on the week of the 16th, there was a lot of strong support from everybody. I think from REBNY, from the unions, from the associations that our contractors deal with, to many of our competitors and ourselves as well, that there seemed to be almost a unanimous decision or support to keep our industry up and running. It seemed like a good idea at the time. It was a way to keep another 150 or 200,000 tradespeople up and working, and take into consideration majority of them, if not all of them, are hourly employees. So when the jobs aren't open, they're not working, they're not getting paid. And there was just a lot of support coming from many, many angles to keep our industry up, open, and essential. So I think with that support and probably the government's thought of trying to keep some industry up and running for the economy of the state and the country, off we went. Everybody went out to work, and like business was usual. So that's kind of a 9 or 10 day window there of where we started to where we are now. So now we're all home, working from home primarily, and we'll see what the new environment brings us.
So Scott, it's Marc. If I can jump in, give
Sure.
you a break. That is a great recap on the deterioration within the job site and construction projects over the past couple of weeks. At the time, just before the shutdown took place, just to give you an idea, and these are just VVA statistics, we had about 5% of our projects that were closed down due to someone on the job site being infected. And obviously those job sites at the time were cleaned and reopened a couple days later. We had about 1 to 2% of our projects that were actually canceled by the client with an indeterminate, outcome as to whether or not they were going to come back. And then about 10% of the projects were placed on a limited hold. The remaining projects were all going, as Scott suggested, with a deterioration of the manpower up until last Friday when the moratorium took place. Clearly, under these circumstances, nobody's really working on site. But what that gives us is a great opportunity to take advantage of this downtime in the construction activity and really do what we can to advance our projects in other ways. Several of the things we can do, for example, is to keep the design team completely engaged. For projects that aren't in construction and in design, there's virtually no impact to people being able to work from home and progress the design side of things. We also think it's a great time to resolve open design issues, circulate shop drawings, get submittals approved, respond to RFI logs and things like that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to focus 100% of your attention to. What that does is it gives you a great opportunity to be completely ready when construction resumes. No one knows when that'll happen, but take advantage of the time while we can and progress as much as we can relative to design. We also think it's a great time to go out to bid projects. If your project's designs are ready and able to go out to bid, all the estimators are working, everybody's engaged and connected, via remote access. We think the market's going to be extremely competitive, and it's advantageous to validate your budgets and take advantage of the competition that's going to be out there. I think everybody's going to be hungry as a result of what we're all going through at this time.
So Marc, I support you, everything that you said. I don't have the statistics that you do on the projects that, the status of some of our projects. We did have a few that went on hold, temporary hold. We've not had anything canceled at this time, but we absolutely have moved forward with all of the projects that are in the design and documentation phases. and have been very successful. Technology has made all the difference in the world. Our firm, IA, is in the cloud, so we're not only connected internally, but we also are able to connect very well with our partners, our clients, our consultants. We have been doing design presentations via Skype, via Google Hangouts, all of these technologies that I, of a different generation, am learning to get a better hold on, including this panel discussion.
Tune in next week, Buzz. Shameless plug.
Well, and you know, we are finding that we're trying to maintain some sense of normalcy as we move forward in a lot of different ways. Even as Scott pointed out, Scott, actually the dates that you mentioned when things started to really get noticed in the construction side, we were starting to see that as well, and we implemented a work from home at your decision the week of the 16th, and then of course as time progressed we got to the government's directive that it was 100% work from home. But we got a little practice in. We even had an opportunity to interview for a potential new project via Zoom, and that was a new experience for all of us, but one that we felt like was very successful. Granted, it was for a technology company, so they may have been a step ahead of us, but still a great opportunity. You know, as far as construction goes, we have, up until recently, when everybody had to go home from the construction site, we were actually even using some technologies like FaceTime and Skype to answer questions from the field with the subcontractors, with the contractors. And you know, it's we're all learning at this point, and it's certainly something that we're learning a new way of doing things, but people are adapting and people are being very patient and very understanding with each other as we move forward. Right now, we are actually continuing to do review submittals to respond to RFIs for projects that have entered the construction process. And I think, Marc, it was you who said about the pricing. Absolutely, we're able to keep going through price checking, through bidding, and actually have a project right now in process for bid. So we, as I said, we're trying to maintain as best as possible a sense of normalcy as we move forward, keeping our colleagues' safety in mind as well. One of our recent discussions internally had to do with the receipt of packages of samples at individuals' homes. We have some people in our office who have lived with their parents, their older parents, and they're very concerned. We have had discussions with the contractors with whom we're working, and everyone has been very agreeable in ways to review and approve the submittals that we're getting, even the ones that you feel might be the most sensitive to do. So we're finding workarounds.
If I can just jump in with one other point, again, during the shutdown, trying to make and take advantage of the opportunities. It's kind of amusing that the Department of Buildings is still operating. They're still reviewing plans, although, you know, remotely. Same with fire department inspections and things like that. But they are open for business. And this shutdown really gives us an opportunity to try to get all our permits, clear the objections that might exist on some of your projects, on the plans, fire alarm objections and things of that nature. And really, again, be positioned, well positioned, so that when construction resumes, you're ready to go and you're able to hit the ground running. Everybody is going to be starting up at the same time. So clearly, the more ready you are to, you know, take advantage and start things efficiently, the better off your projects will be, and it will limit the overall impact to your timelines.
And Marc, to that point, some of the things, some of the conversations that have been had within the past couple of days with the clients have also been, are there any options out there for material substitutions, things that we might want to start considering right now for when we are ready to hit the ground that might be more readily available? Because we are seeing a lot of factories start to shut down. Lighting factories, furniture manufacturers are closing to be able to keep their employees safe.
Just to add a little bit to both Buzz and to Marc, what we're asking from our our people, as well as maintaining the estimating side, any bidding, any budgeting, any, best and finals with subcontractors online, with the client there to get people awarded for when we go. The only thing maybe didn't mention was, our field folks, we're having them stay in constant contact with the subcontractor community in terms of making sure they're through their engineering and, trying to make sure that they're keeping whatever pulse they can on material orders. And just like you said, the streamline of product, Marc's right, when this finally reopens, there will be a mad dash to the start line. But depending on where your product is coming from, may change some of that, right? We all have parts and pieces that are coming from Canada with the border closed down. We all have parts and pieces coming from Germany and Italy, and that's a different set of circumstances. Whether it's California, Pennsylvania, there's a lot of places that parts and pieces are coming in. We're not going to all open up the floodgates on the same day and say, wow, everything's back to normal. So I think the restarting it will really be a challenge. And I know clients will be screaming at all of us saying, all right, what's my new schedule? Unfortunately, it's probably going to take some time to really be able to figure that out and give them a fair and straight answer, because I don't think our suppliers are going to have it, coming right out of the gate.
Scott, I think that ties to another point I wanted to make, which is, people should be assessing the risk to their projects based on the changing timelines and also the cost implications. Make no mistake, there will be cost implications to every project associated with, what we've been going through. And, I think clients have to understand those impacts. A day-for-day delay at this point is your absolute best case scenario. You really need the time on these job sites once construction resumes to remobilize, and it's not going to be just like turning on a switch, as Scott said, and just pick up where you left off. There's going to be an inefficiency. There may be still a lack of manpower depending on how quickly the trades can remobilize and people get back to work. There's certainly going to be individuals who don't want to go back to work right away and wait a little bit longer for things to clear. And there's also going to be procedures on site, an increased emphasis on, personal protective equipment. You need to make sure that your contractors are paying close attention to the sanitary conditions on the job sites. And as Scott mentioned, the social distancing and the way that we work on the job site is going to change, and it's going to be somewhat inefficient. So I think those factors will, ultimately contribute in some way to cost, and you need to just kind of be prepared for it and forecast as best you can.
And Marc, it will extend beyond just the subcontractors themselves, the consultants who are integral to site review and inspection. Actually, if you even think about the building department inspectors, this is going to run the gamut. There's going to be, I see someone typed in a phased opening, and that's probably a great way to put it, that you're going to have a gradual acclimation back to the world that we knew before all of this happened.
I would agree with you, Buzz. I think, again, we're all itching and wondering when the government's going to give us some direction when we might restart. They have not given us that yet, at least not in New York. I would agree with you. It will probably be a phased opening, depending on what projects have the most breathing room at first. I think from an interior standpoint, we're already starting to discuss with some of the unions probably the inability to get the proper PPE equipment and masks that are going to be required. The social distancing will remain a serious challenge, I think, at all elevators and all projects, but especially in the interiors. So we have recently started discussing with some of the unions whether they would be advantageous to create different start times. For instance, we may say, all the mechanical trades start at 6 in the morning, the carpentry and certain trades start at 7 in the morning, and the finished trades start at 8. Now that will make for a longer day for the client, for the general contractor, but it'll give us at least a little more opportunity to social distance, as opposed to everybody piling into the elevator at 10 minutes to 7 every morning with their bag of coffee and their muffin, and then we're right on top of each other again. So those are some of the things that we're starting to discuss in the industry for all of our behalfs. So, the next few weeks' time will tell, what we think is the best way to get us restarted, and then it'll be up to the government as to how we restart and, when we actually, get the green light. So.
Thanks, Scott. I wanted, we're all hitting on some good stuff, and I see some really good questions starting to come in. But before we start getting back to the questions, I'd like to, hit on Jaime. Jaime, with Apollo and the work that you have going on, I know you were affected here in New York. Could you speak to some of the things that you're seeing both on your projects with regards to, the progress thereof, and also with regards to how internally, what are you facing with regards to any changes? Is your budget getting looked at, or are you looking at different ways of working, or what are some of the implications you're seeing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's safe, as we've been saying. So I've been listening to a lot of what's been said between Scott, Buzz, and Marc, and I can tell you from the client side, so a lot of the things that we're asking the same exact questions that they're saying, right? So where's my new schedule? What's happening with all the products that are being done, whether it's in a different state or overseas. When are we going to come back? And having conversations, I think we all agree, as I think Scott mentioned, that this is going to be, once we get the green light to go back to the site, this is going to be in phases, right? So I don't necessarily think this is going to be a best case day for day. To me, I just don't think that. I think that's just going to be pretty much impossible. But I mean, bottom line is to answer the question in terms of cost, and reality is, as we all know, delays means nothing but like an impact to your financial to your bottom line. And I think obviously this is really unprecedented. Nobody's even go through this, and many of the tenants were looking at the force majeure clauses not only on the leases but also in construction contracts and all of that. So a lot of people are thinking and struggling how to actually really interpret this. But I mean, when you start looking, when you have an active project that all of a sudden gets delayed, you have the potential domino effect that most likely you may be holding over in one of your other sites that you're relocating to. And not only that presents an issue to the tenants, but also to the landlords as well. So the landlords are in this as well, and having the same issues, and obviously having some of the same concerns, because obviously they cannot deliver the space that they promise to other tenants that are in line waiting for you to vacate. In terms of a lot of the things that we also looking at, and as a company, we've pretty much learning to work from home. We were not necessarily a company which had a culture of working from home. However, we're finding out very quickly that we're able to to really operate from, obviously Zoom has been it's been a godsend for many of us, and pretty much people are adapting. Obviously that cannot substitute a lot of what we do, which is getting in front of investors and in front of clients, but obviously we're doing the best we can. But that's also not the case, obviously, and we're having some issues as well. It depends all by geography and location. So we're having some issues in, say, India, where people are working from home. They don't have the same technology or capabilities, and they have some issues such as Wi-Fi and other issues and other challenges that is making this a little bit harder. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think, the more that this is going on, the more people are starting to feel more comfortable in working from home. And it's been a pretty good, pretty good lesson learned that, a lot of what we do can continue to, operate and be BAU, as we all work from home.
Just to add a couple points to what was said there, in terms of schedule, every client, every project will have its own unique situation. But if folks are in New York and we were shut down for 4 weeks, it may or may not be a 4-week delay. We may be able to make up some of the time in some cases, and we can make a 4-week problem a 2-week problem. And then, quite frankly, just because New York was shut down for 4 weeks doesn't mean that the products you're getting from other parts of the country or other parts of the world don't have an 8-week delay. So each case will have to be evaluated, individually, but I don't think it will be day to day across the board. I also saw one question pop up with the staggered start idea. Would that add to general conditions? Probably a little bit, but by and large, the general contractors that are required for site cleanliness, the labor force, they'd be there a couple extra hours a day. But the other trades, they would still work their 8-hour day or their 7-hour day, depending on their agreement. But you would just stagger the influx of people into the building and the influx out of the building later on. And by staggering a start, we'd have to stagger the lunchtime operation as well. So as people are leaving the building and coming back in, you know, again, it's just ideas to try to social distance, but it was a good question. It probably bring a little more burden to the general conditions.
That's true.
Mark, you're muted.
Mark,
Yep.
unmute.
Unmute, Mark. There you go.
Apologies. I think I'm back. I just saw a question pop up about how do we propose, you know, being able to make up time during construction. You know, to the extent that it's going to take a few weeks to really ramp up and get things moving on a somewhat productive basis again, you could also work with clients and the owners, reps, project managers to establish an overtime allowance to the extent you might be able to work 10-hour days, provided that you're getting the proper manpower on your project. None of these things are going to be free, but if time and money are the two things that you have to balance out, of course, with quality in the background, you need to make an evaluation of each project and what those time needs are, you know, versus budget, and see what the opportunities are and what the potential cost increase would be.
Hey, Mark, I'd like to ask you a question. Have you been challenged in some of your projects? I mean, are you getting the same treatment by all the landlords, or are some landlords being, you know, maybe more difficult than others in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed?
You know, it's interesting. Until the mandated shutdown by the governor, landlords were incredibly cooperative across the board. That was my experience. And I think the majority of landlords are incentivized. They want to avoid those delays or claims that a tenant might be able to make, you know, due to inaccessibility and so forth to their job sites. So we really didn't have an issue with that. Certain buildings were a little more demanding than others in terms of how they operated the freight elevators, to a point that Scott touched on early on. You can't cram 20 guys into a freight elevator and, you know, expect they're not, you know, breathing on one another. So obviously, limiting maybe 4 to 5 people at a time in the elevator. Some of those practices were implemented by the building and the operators of those services. But, you know, I think they're incentivized to do the work, just like so many of us wanted things to progress, but obviously we have to put safety first. And I think that's really set in over the past week or two when you see the progression of this disease and what's going on specifically in New York.
Yep. Great. So we've been keeping tabs on questions here. They're all flowing in pretty hot and heavy, and I know that we're answering pretty much as they go. I saw one early on that I'd like to go back. It's getting buried here from Lisa Brinkman. Lisa wrote, for those projects that you're having design teams move on, what assurances are you getting from your clients, and what concerns do you have relative to them rethinking their scope given their newfound ability to work remotely? That might be a good question for Jaime.
Tommy, you broke up over there?
Sorry, Jaime. Lisa, can you unmute and ask the question? Lisa Brinkman, are you still on?
I am, and I can re-ask the question. Hi, Jaime.
Hey, Lisa, how are you?
Good, good. I was asking, you know, with conversation about kind of keeping the designers moving forward. They're in the design phases, and I think might have been, Marc, a little bit of your commentary, but what kind of assurance are you getting from end users in order to continue to have the design teams work? And what concerns are there about the potential scope changes that might be coming? Because as people are learning that they might not need all that space because they can be working remotely, that the scope is going to change.
Good question. I mean, from our perspective, we're not there yet in terms of, you know, I mean, I have a couple of projects going on around the globe. One of them is obviously in construction. So obviously we're not going to be making any changes to the design at this point. But in other projects such as London that we have going on, we're not contemplating any changes, you know, at least not at the time being. I mean, that's not to say that things may be different in 3 months. As I said before, we're learning new ways to work. But in terms of our culture, I mean, I don't foresee, and I could be completely wrong on this one, I don't see our culture changing that quickly, right? I mean, it may take some time to do this, but we're not contemplating any changes to the design at this point in time. So, I mean, again, it's we continue to do business as usual, and in terms of like the design and trying to do the best we can remotely, and obviously via technology, via presentations on PowerPoint and all of that, but no changes.
And Jaime, I can substantiate your stand on this, because we're seeing this with many of our clients right now. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of conversations that are happening. But I think what we're seeing right now is an enhanced way of working, that we're trying to maintain our world, our business as best as possible, using the technologies that are available to us. But we are still the same cultures, we're still the same companies, and we're still thinking this way. Things could change, certainly, as they always do, evolve over time. But I agree with you on this.
Yeah, and if I may add, obviously a lot of people start thinking along the lines of, well, now everybody's working from home, so you can either work in a tighter space. Now maybe you don't need as much space, but let's all remember the way our brains have been actually programmed lately. I think this may actually bring the opposite of the open floor environment. I mean, some employees may feel like now they need more distance from one another, as opposed to everybody being crammed, in a trading environment. So, I mean, I think if we were to start, or I mean, not just us, but anybody start saying, we're not going to now get rid of even more open space, and I mean, getting rid of more office space, and we're going to cram more people together, I don't know how well that's going to be received.
I think if I can add, one of the risks to project scope for those projects that are in design right now might be budgetary, implications with various organizations trying to reduce costs as a result of the hit, that this is going to take on the economy. And, so for that reason, people may choose to look at some of their designs and maybe scale back a little bit on the cost. Obviously, that'll vary by organization and, depending on the priority that's placed on that given project. But that could certainly be an influencer, if you will, relative to scope changes that may have to be adopted, as you move forward into design.
There's a question here posed by Dan Wright, and I believe Dan is joining us from the West Coast. But Scott, I think that this may be best answered by you, where you were addressing how a 4-week delay because of our shutdown may not actually impact a project by 4 weeks. Maybe there could be ways that you could make it up in 2 or 3 weeks. And the question was posed, how specifically do you see being able to make up that time?
I think it depends on, obviously, the parts and pieces that are part of the project. If they're obtainable when we come out of this hold pattern or pause pattern, if everyone's working hard behind the scenes like we've been discussing here, answering submittals, answering RFIs, getting through any BIM coordination, if we can then somehow, it's more of a not the highest end project, and we can get our hands on the common parts and pieces, with some premium time, with some overtime, we might be able to make up some of the lost time on a client's behalf. I would think that that's probably going to become few and far between, because I do think we're going to have supply chain problems, both domestically and then for sure internationally. But that would be one way that we would hope to go into the restart with a positive frame of mind to do our best for our clients.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mindy, if I can just add to that, I think, again, going back to one of the earlier points that I made, this is a great opportunity for everybody to take advantage of this downtime and move as many things as possible forward. Be in the best position possible when the ban gets lifted and construction starts. The last thing you want to be doing 2-3 weeks from now, 2 months from now, whatever that time is restart the project and say, okay, what questions do you have? I mean, that dialogue needs to happen now and get all of that out of the way so that you can hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Another question that was posed by Brigitte Beltran is, for those of you that have offices or projects going on in Asia, what are your peers or counterparts doing now, and what lessons learned or best practices have they shared with you with what they're doing and how they're starting to come back?
I mean, I can just talk about a project that I have going on in Tokyo, and construction has yet to start. And for those of you who have done projects in Tokyo, it's not uncommon for the landlord to not only do the build out, but also to own the GC as well that is actually performing your work. So I was actually in a call this morning, and we have yet to start construction. However, it's still on schedule. We're about to start in about 2 to 3 weeks. And of course, I mean, they're pulling out the fact that if somebody tests positive or becomes sick, I mean, the site might need to shut down for a period of time until it gets cleaned up. But for the time being, what they're telling us is that they expect to make the schedule, the timeline, and deliver on time. So, I mean, to me, that's probably a good sign in terms of maybe obviously they're ahead of the curve from where we are. And hopefully things are starting to, get back to normal over there. And hopefully, again, it all started out there. So hopefully we're going to be getting the same type of news and the same type of movement here sooner rather than later.
Anyone else want to add on that or give their experience? I do see there's some clients here with offices abroad that might be on mute, but be a good chance for any of the end users that could add or verify.
I think one of the point from the construction side, if I may share, especially for the India market, we have been implemented or using CCTVs on site on cameras, and CCTV with the monitoring that you have that app sitting anywhere in the world, and you can just log into the app and watch any floor of your on-site cameras. So per floor, we have installed 3 to 4 cameras, so you can view from different angles just to monitor it while you're away. Right now, it's completely shut down anyways, but I feel that even if things would start coming back, it's not going to be like today is the day when everybody starts going from there. It's going to be a phase-wise, slow kind of movement to get back to the work. So that's one of the things which we have been implemented. I would be very curious to learn if that's the same you guys are doing in the US market.
I haven't seen that yet on too many jobs, from our standpoint, in the restart program. Obviously, we got to get the trades folks back there to do the work and our people back there to supervise it so that, things can be witnessed via CCTV. But I think it's a good point that on certain larger, more open projects, it probably makes a lot of sense to keep, at least in the first 60, 90 days or so, keeping more and more people off of the sites. Maybe the consultants can see a lot more visual from that point as opposed to having to go to the job sites.
Larry, Charlip, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, actually, so on this point, I was just going to mention, we've got some sites in Asia, and while we don't have construction going on there, I can tell you just from building management, as particularly in China, where buildings are starting to reopen, the building owners are putting a lot of the onus on the tenant and requiring us to sign waivers of liability for having contractors in our space, even if it's building contractors. For instance, in our building in China, they are having the HVAC systems disinfected, and but in order for them to turn it on in our space, we have to sign a waiver. For them to have their contractors in our space, we have to sign a waiver. So that's the way some of these sites in Asia are starting to approach them.
To jump in for a second on the building component side, we have a site in the UK. We've managed to continue the building components of the things that are going into the space through some of the manufacturers moving to shifts. So smaller shifts, slower schedule, but we focused on looking at where manufacturers are allowed to work in shifts as opposed to, say, ordering glass from Italy, and been able to reassign or look at shift-based labor to keep production of building components moving for parts of projects that haven't been awarded yet.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's something that will definitely be broached here in New York, along with staggered starts. The second conversation with the industry will be, you know, even if it's for a shorter grace period, could the second shift, you know, be a similar cost or reduced premium cost just to help get, you know, A, the separation individually coming back to work, and B, it might put more people back to work a little quicker. So I think the industry is ready to try to help in any way they can. But again, that's New York can be a challenge sometimes dealing with that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There was another comment from David Horowitz. David, I thought you had an interesting, you know, just a comment on what you're seeing from the C-suite challenges. Did you want to speak to your comment there or add any color?
Sure. I would just say that we have seen several C-suite folks engaging CRE, questioning whether this present mode of operating their businesses is going to be a far-reaching method of operation. So even though they may have been in comfortable workstation environment or office environment, is there going to be a compression of workspace? Is there going to be a movement toward, you know, fully hoteled or unaddressed work assignment for companies that haven't done that before? And so we're starting to see that being questioned or challenged, and C-suite folks asking, you know, what's happening with their competitors, what's the feedback to the CREs from design team members of what design team folks are seeing from various clients. So the questioning is definitely starting with some of our clients.
Yeah.
So David, I'll take the first part of this. I'm curious to hear what Marc may be hearing from the clients with whom he's working from the design side. I think that there's been a lot of knee-jerk reaction to what has happened, and part of it is driven by the sudden change that we had to implement as a workforce. I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation with every company and every culture. I think right now it's difficult to say that there's going to be any sort of trend whatsoever. We may very easily just go back to the way things used to be. I think we're all so lonely right now that we're all going to be so happy to see each other. We'll be more than happy to sit next to each other. But I do think that it is still a big question mark, and I don't think that there is any sort of definite direction that's been defined at this point, but lots of great, intriguing conversations.
Yeah, our experience is that people have not yet thought about retooling their design direction. But it is going to be very interesting, I think, to see where things go in time, whether or not that, you know, 4-foot wide benching scenario is really going to be something people want to create after what we've learned about the importance of, you know, social distancing during an epidemic like this. So no, we haven't seen it yet, but I think, as Buzz said, it's going to be an evolving conversation. It's probably going to be a year or even 2 years before people start reformulating what their work standards will be and how that impacts their projects.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I agree with obviously Buzz's comment, right, which is something I alluded earlier, that, you know, it's not going to be, can be a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, something like this is not going to change any company's culture, you know, overnight. And, you know, in addition to that, I mean, to David, to your question on compression and hoteling, you know, I also wonder what's going to happen with the hoteling, you know, platform, or, you know, the model, I should say, right? I mean, now I think everybody's going to be so paranoid of like who sat on this desk the day before, you know, and all of that. So I think it's going to take a lot of time for people to get past that. I mean, based on what we learned and what we've been experiencing for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah. I think Larry Charlip of Take-Two, you had a point on that?
Yeah, I just in having conversations with other end users that I know who also are on the facilities management side and not just the corporate real estate side, is a lot of their employees where in talking with companies that do hot desking in particular, my company doesn't, but for companies that do, employees are starting to
to voice concerns over coming in and not having an assigned desk and not knowing who sat there the day before. So there may be, you know, people might, CREs and C-suite might not be talking about it yet, but I think there is going to be a conversation as we start talking about reopening offices and companies that are hot desking, where their employees aren't comfortable with that scenario. Whether or not social distancing is a different scenario, right? Whether or not we're sitting close to each other. That's one question. Hot desking is another. And again, having to sit in a seat where you don't know who sat there the day before you, I think is going to be a question, at least in the short term. It might wash out in the long term, but in the short term, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it's a great time to get into the business of cleaning office spaces. If you think of the traditional cleaning spec and what landlords and tenants pay on a preventable square foot basis, you can expect that number to probably double or triple in time as we reevaluate those services and enhance all the things that take place on a daily basis and a weekly basis to a much higher frequency. And there's certainly going to be a cost aside, attributed to that, which is going to ultimately get rolled into people's occupancy and real estate costs.
Yeah.
And I think from a design standpoint, I read an interesting article the other day. There are so many things people are talking about relative to the cleanliness of offices, the hygiene in offices, and having hand washing stations more than just the pantry sink or the toilet room sink. So there's going to be ongoing conversations as we move forward beyond this that are going to start to impact every part of our operations and every part of our design.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd like to pose to the panel is, one of the questions I'd like to pose is, what lessons learned do you think you guys will be talking about as far as business continuity going forward? How are some of those strategies going to be framed, and how will they change moving forward?
I mean, I can say, I mean, from our perspective, obviously be prepared and try to stay ahead of the curve. I mean, I think for us was critical that our technology folks were really, ahead of everybody and kind of like, preparing for the worst, expecting the best, and obviously, and we hit the worst. So I think we were pretty well prepared. And the other thing is, I mean, don't be afraid to overspend, right? I mean, it's, when something like this is always better to be prepared and make sure that you secure the resources that you need ahead of time. And, and some companies obviously start moving more to laptop models rather than desktops. I mean, there's still a lot of companies out there that primarily rely on having desktops and dialing in, which could be issues, people having to reboot computers or computers going down, or if you lose power, then all of a sudden you're out connectivity. So that would be another thing that I would say. I mean, become more mobile, whether you're in the office or whether you're from home. I mean, have a laptop and not a desktop.
I think for our firm, we had already transitioned to that, and we like to believe we're right on the cutting edge in terms of any technology and construction technology. All of our folks have laptops. All of our field has either laptops, iPads, access to plan grids. So at a minute's notice, they can pretty much take off to go home, and they have all their drawings and all their projects right in front of them. So, as well as staying current with any new technology that comes out that, just makes, field operations, capable of doing it remotely. I mean, there's still nothing better than being, on the job to see how progress is really starting. But, we were able to, pretty much adapt and send hundreds of people home, almost in a day or two's notice, and they could pretty much pick up, the minute they plugged in at home. So.
Sorry, I'm muted there. I'm muted. Sorry, Scott, I think that speaks to a point from Nishar made in the chat feed that, if we can work remotely like this, I think, from the construction side, I think, and Nisha, this is just an opinion, I think that you're going to see a lot of old line thinking open up to working from home now. And this will be the litmus, test. I personally, not to get off topic too, I think you're going to see this from the universities too. This is a great, learning experiment, remotely. And, why are we paying all this money, for room and board. And, obviously there are reasons for that, but I think it goes beyond just our industry when you're looking at working remotely.
Yeah, I would think there's, plenty of change that will come out of this, just like post 9/11, the way, security and the way we operate now has changed, just like here now, as, real estate may or may not change, as Buzz mentioned. I think a lot of the activity that, happens on job sites and happens in, a lot of our offices, we may find that a piece or two or a department or two, can pretty comfortably and productively work from home now. Like you said, it may, may need a little reduction in, office space square footage. So I think, like, Marc had mentioned too, whether it's 1 year or 2 years down the road, there's probably be a host of changes that come out because of this.
I think if I can add, one of the things that this pandemic is proving to all of us is that, one of the deterrents to organizations having their people work from home was the quote, lack of ability to collaborate and work together as teams. But, with the technology tools we have and the video tools that we have, collaboration in a work from home environment doesn't seem to be as strange or, unproductive as people might have thought. And I think we are going to come out of this with a lot to think about relative to how we treat office space moving forward.
True. Well, we've got only a short few minutes left, 3 minutes to be exact. Is there anybody that's muted that hasn't used the chat function that has anything they want to add? All right. Well, I think this has been a very, very productive conversation. I want to thank, our panelists who have been, a great source of information. We really appreciate you taking the time to prep for this and to join it and to, share all that you've learned with the rest of the chapter. Mindy, anything you want to add there?
No, I'll just echo that. I know that we literally pulled this together in a matter of days. The conversation kind of had one focus, and then we had to completely pivot when the governor had asked us to shut everything down. So really, I want to say thank you to Scott, Buzz, Jaime, and Marc for, one, making yourselves available for this, and two, your flexibility and ability to kind of pivot the conversation and just kind of keep pace with the rapid rate of how everything is changing in our world right now.
Thank you both.
Well said.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everybody, and hope to see you on the chats and the other plugged in series next week.
All
And
right.
it's so good
Everybody.
to see everybody's faces who turned on their videos. So thank you, because it kind of, it makes this extrovert's heart warm. I miss seeing everyone. So
Thanks, everyone. Be
going a little
safe.
cabin crazy.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Big party when this is over.
I know, right?
Cancel.